Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and before we get into a listener question this week, let me just suggest if you enjoy this show, if you find value in what Mike and Mike are telling you, please share the show with a colleague because we want this to spread throughout the sales community. And we know the more people that listen, the more questions we will get, which brings me to this week's episode is another listener question. And Mike, I hope this doesn't confuse you, but the question is from someone named Mike. Another Mike. Yes.
What? 2 mics are half Mike and 3 mics are no Mike at all. Here we go for the trifecta. This is probably going to be one of the best listener questions ever.
It could be. Mike from New Jersey says, my sales manager keeps hounding me to do more demos, but when I do demos, that seems to be where I get stalled. Mike, what do I do? Now, I don't know if he's talking Mike Connor or Mike Simmons, but he says, Mike, what do I do?
Sounds like he has a crappy demo. I'm just kidding, Mike. Mics have a sense of humor generally, except for the mics across the room for me today.
I have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Some people just don't get it.
Yeah. Well, I'm still learning. It's only been, 8 or 9 years?
Well, moving on 10, it seems like.
Like any good marriage. All right. So that's a great question, actually. Not that people ask us bad questions, but that's one that I think a lot of people can relate with if you're really being asked to do demos for the sake of demo. And I think I got a few things that kind of popped into my head about that very topic. And I've been there before because it is part of the process is obviously at some point you are going to have to, show, and I'm taking this from the perspective that it's some sort of SaaS product or some sort of web product. I won't talk about demoing vacuum cleaners, which I could actually talk about. Maybe I will talk about that later because I used to work for Sears Roebuck when I was in college. That's actually a good one. Actually, we are going to talk about that. And then we're going to bring it around and we're going to say why that doesn't work for technology sales. So,
well, before you get on a roll and start talking about dust bags being dropped on a carpet and getting vacuumed.
Oh, don't take the thunder out of my story.
Or confetti or any of that stuff. I think when I heard the question, the first thing that popped into my mind is be careful what you measure.
This is true because you'll get what you measure.
You will absolutely get what you measure. And there's always ways to game the system. And you got to be careful about what kind of culture you're creating. So, all right, back to cleaning up dust bunnies.
So true story. So I worked at Sears Roebuck when I was in college. I actually worked in there. They had a huge call center in the basement of one of the Sears stores actually in Buena Park, California. And I used to, it's kind of like working in a prison because there was no windows and we were literally in a basement with steel case World War II desks. Anyhow, man, now I'm going to start sounding old. Okay. So anyhow, it's what probably still there.
You're just now starting to sound old.
I don't know. Okay. Hang with me here for a second. So I'm doing my shift. I'm working in a call center. We get our 15-minute break, which usually means you run upstairs to they used to have a snack food store thing inside of Sears. So you get your pretzel and your Coke or whatever. I'm going upstairs and I'm walking by this guy that's doing vacuum cleaner demonstrations. And I say hi to him all the time or whatever. It's somebody that I see all the time because I'm at work. And one day I decided to ask him if he was successful in selling a lot of vacuum cleaners. And he was telling me that Sears had done this exhaustive study over the years. And they knew that if they could get 16 people to watch him vacuum up a pile of dust out of his sample piece of carpet, that he would sell 1 vacuum cleaner. So it was literally a game of, for every 16, I know I'm going to get 1. And therefore, the job was get as many people as you can to watch your demonstration and you'll sell a vacuum cleaner.
So like 16 at one time with the guy with the microphone that comes out of his ear and is talking into it like an infomercial, or are these one-on-one demos?
These are one-on-one demos. Keep in mind, I just set the stage that I worked in the basement of an old Sears store. So he was not really rigged with the Tony Robbins style microphone and all that stuff. This was him standing in the aisle with his trusty vacuum, with a square piece of carpet that was like 3 feet by 3 feet, a little container full of fur balls and dust and all kinds of miscellaneous vacuum items that you'd find. and he would grab people as they're walking by in the aisle, and he'd say, "Hey, have you seen the new whatever vacuum and how well it works?" And he would have the person dump the load of crap into the carpet, and then he would show them how effortlessly this new vacuum cleaner would just suck that mess right on up. That was his job. So 16 to 1. Get 16 and you're going to sell yourself a vacuum.
It sounds like a blast.
Yeah. So thinking about that, he actually, he didn't mind it. It wasn't too hard to work. But now that I think about it, do we do the same thing with demos in a software setting or a SaaS product where we know that if we can get enough people to look at the product, that eventually a few of them will end up becoming customers? And that certainly will be the case. But much like the vacuum cleaner guy, do you want to do 16 demos to get one person to say, yeah, I want to buy your product? Seems like a lot of demos.
Seems like a lot of demos and not a lot of thought. Turns it into just a pure numbers game, which kind of goes against what we talk about when we think of sales as a thinking process.
Right. Because I think if you told the vacuum cleaner guy how he could actually sell a vacuum every fourth time,
you've got my attention.
I'm pretty sure he would be on board with that. But we kind of find ourselves doing the same things. And so now bringing it current and talking about selling a SaaS product or a software product, we do see that happen a lot where people, and I also have the perspective of being sold to a lot, right? Because we buy platforms, we buy technology, and we subscribe to things. And I am sold to probably just as frequently as I'm selling to other people. But that idea that, hey, all I want to do is hook you into a demo so you can see the product. And I think a lot of times what ends up happening is the salesperson feels like, well, if I'm willing to invest the time to look at the platform and they can show me how awesome it is, then somehow some magic is going to happen. And then I'm going to want to license whatever that product is without understanding why I would even want to see the product in the first place or what problems it would solve for me. The idea, it seems to always be this push for, well, if I can just get them on a demo.
And as you're describing it, I think this 3 foot by whatever piece of carpet. What if I don't have carpet in my house?
It's a good point. I don't know if it worked on hard surface floors. This was a while ago. So I think it was a one-trick pony. It was mostly for carpet.
So my point wasn't really about the vacuum cleaner and whether or not it worked there, more about the questions you have to ask.
Right.
Before you dive into the demo and become a demo donkey.
A demo donkey.
Well, I mean, think about it. How many times have you been in a demo and you just get on a roll and you feel like you are hitting every single note that you've got to hit? You're on every one of your beats. You don't even take a breath. And you wrap up with the demo and you're like, hey, now it's time to start slapping high fives thinking you just nailed it. And what'd you do? Like, how do you know that the person you were demoing to was even engaged in the conversation? How do you know they weren't checking their phone? How do you know they didn't have you on mute having another conversation with somebody else? So, I mean, you got to be careful about just diving into that demo mode where it's, all right, I know that I need to show them how to use the functionality and how to navigate the site and how the search works and how this thing works on multiple devices and all that other kind of crap. Ask some questions.
Yeah, you need to have in the process that we talk about, if you don't know what problem you're trying to solve from a customer's perspective, and if you can't demonstrate your platform from that perspective in solving that problem and really narrow it down to showing how you can actually make the situation better, just going into a general product dump. And I see that a lot and you'll hear things like this come up in questions from the sales rep. The person that's watching the demo or the group that's watching the demo will ask a question and I'll hear the sales rep say something along the lines of, that's a great question. I'm going to get to that in a second, but there's one more thing I wanted to show you before we go there. And then you proceed on with the thing that you want to show versus the thing that they want to see. And I think that's one of the habits. So maybe we could break it down to like, what are some do's and don'ts for really facilitating a good demo?
I think you've also got to be careful there because there are some times where that thing that the customer asks for is part of your demo, but because of context, it's important that you share something else. So there's a genuine way to approach.
Yeah, you would answer that maybe a little differently to say, yes, we are going to cover that. And then when you get to that point, you loop it back and say, now earlier you asked a specific question. Now let me show you. But that could be an indication that you're kind of flailing around your product, but without understanding what would be interesting to them. So I think that was the context I was bringing that forward with, in that a lot of times people want to show everything a product can do versus the one thing that the person really cares about. And you mentioned earlier about people checking out or not paying attention. I mean, you can tell when you listen to a demo as an observer, as a third person, the person not facilitating the demo, you can tell when engagement and interest on the other side starts to wane, because the person giving the demo will say things like, so do you have any questions so far, or any feedback on what I've just shown you? And all you get back is nope, or nope, makes sense, keep rolling. And basically that to me just says we're just jamming through a product demo. There's not a lot of engagement.
The one I love is when there's that silence, and then they realize that the silence has been uncomfortable for a bit too long, and then they pull the, oh, oops, I had you on mute. No questions.
Yeah, that's a very nice way to kind of keep things rolling.
So you said that break it up into a couple of things. Now, and one of the first part of the question was really, is this the right thing to be measuring? And like most things, I'd say it depends. Be careful what you measure, because the implications are pretty direct. If bonuses are based on the number of demos, you're going to get a lot of demos, but you may not see a lot of effective demos, or you may not see a lot of business won. Can it be an appropriate measure? Depending on the business, yeah, if you're selling vacuum cleaners, a demo is going to be really important. There's not a lot of time to get into the detail of the solution that this is going to provide inside an organization. And I mean, even as I say that, I think of how quickly we can move through our sales process. So there is time. It's take the time to think through positioning, information that you're going to gather so that you can deliver that demo in the context of what's important to the customer. But I'm jumping ahead here. So Mike, you said there were a couple of ways to break this up. What would you have in mind?
Well, no, that's kind of what I was thinking, breaking down just some specific things that happen in demos or things to avoid, things like that. And I think the process scales, whether it's, like you said, if it's a short sales cycle meeting, or even one conversation, transactional sort of conversation, or it could be a very extended sales cycle. So we don't have different processes for different ways to sell. We have a thinking process that has different activity tied to it depending on the complexity of the opportunity. So it's one and the same. I think with another thing I would say about demos is what I see happen often is the shift from learning about the customer and the challenges that they're trying to solve, or the problems that you're going to address. That tends to shift very quickly once you get into your own product, because at that point you find yourself talking more about your product. They're asking you questions about the product, and it's very difficult, particularly in the scope of one call, to go from a discovery discussion and learning about the client's needs, shifting it into a demo, and then bringing it back from a customer's perspective. And it can be done, and it's something you need to be sensitive to and aware of, because you always want to loop it back to, okay, what problem is this going to solve for that customer? And too many times what I see happen is it shifts from talking about their issues to, now let's talk about our product. And then all the questions that you get and all the dialogue that happens between the two of you revolves around the product. So another thing to really think about is when you're doing demos, whether or not, and timing is important and all of that of when it happens, but think about how the conversation shifts. So when you're doing your discovery calls, when you're in the beginning of the sales process and you're starting to really learn more about the client and what their challenges are and how you might be able to help them, that's very much talking about the customer. And you'll find that if you do that very well, the customers are generally, if they see value in talking to you, they will share just about anything, and they'll give you all the information that you need to then help them down the road. If you cut that off too soon, or if you don't do a fair amount of that discovery in the beginning, and you don't facilitate that well, and all you're trying to do is get them on a demo, what you're going to find is that your conversations are going to be all about your product and all about your demo itself. And things like, what does your product map look like? Or, yeah, this is a really cool platform, but it's missing the following 3 or 4 things. Or it just becomes very much about you and your product, and bringing it back to the customer's issue that you're trying to solve becomes just another thing that you have to kind of try and circle back to. But once it's kind of like letting the genie out of the bottle. Once you've done that, you open yourself up to a whole nother track of questions from the client that kind of advance you too quickly. In other words, maybe you've shown it too soon.
Well, and as you're going through that, I think of our sales process. So you're talking about a demo getting in the way of discovery, and what I hear there, and what we see is a common mistake is using a demo as a way to qualify a customer. The challenge with doing that is you're going to fall into the same trap as if you were to use price as a way to qualify a customer. So I don't know what I recall the AT&T saying. What was it? This process is the solution. Is that an AT&T-ism?
Who's the old guy now?
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
That's old school AT&T. It's not like the new cute girl in the AT&T mobile store. That's like the old school AT&T.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm old.
Wow.
I'm embracing it. So, but anyhow, you go through this process and you say, where does the demo really fit? And I would say it's better to come up in that fit area, maybe even kind of broaching into feasibility. But this is a better place for us. We like to see the demo happen in the fit area, not in the qualification part of the sales cycle. And ideally, those feasibility questions, once you move into feasibility, that's where those questions start to come up. Some of the objections that they have around technology, because we're asking those questions around it, since we're able to deliver this solution, is it feasible to be able to implement this thing inside the organization? Feasible from both a budget perspective, a financial perspective, as well as technical perspective. But just trying to kind of integrate this back into the Catalyst sale process. I think one of the rookie mistakes that happens is when you start using your demo as a way to qualify. And when you do that, you start looking for the customer to say yes to certain things. And you start checking the box and you're thinking, this thing is moving along. And now they are not really properly qualified. They just said yes to a couple of the cool feature functionality things that you've shown them. And you don't really have an understanding of what their core business issues are.
Yeah, you kind of sparked another thought for me too when you mentioned the process. And, is it in that fit area or in the feasibility area? And I think could it happen in either? I mean, it can happen anytime. You can have people that say, I just want to see the product, show it to me. But assuming you're following a process and the client has been joining you in that journey and things are going well, once you get into that fit stage, I think the fit piece of it comes in when you're talking about a custom solution where you're going to have to get somebody from product or engineering to validate the things you're talking about. If I'm talking more of a custom solution now, right?
That internal step, like we've talked about, and we can.
But feasibility is really where, if you don't want to do multiple demos to multiple audiences for the same engagement that seem to drag on forever and ever, the appropriate time and where it makes sense and where it fits in the sales process is when you are doing that feasibility testing, because you know the problem you're trying to solve, you're talking to the right people. This is something that they've, at least at the onset, that it's a problem that they want to solve. You understand the process to make that happen. You've checked internally with the people that you need to deliver this thing, and they've given it a thumbs up. And now you're ready to go back. And that, from a sales process perspective, from our process, that is where the tide shifts, where now you're providing more information than you're trying to gather. And that's where it makes sense to do that demo, because what you're doing is two things. You're showing them the platform and the product in a way that resonates with them to address the specific problem they have, which by definition means you can't just have a 90-minute demo loop that you say, here, go through this whole demo and it's going to tell you everything you want to know. But the second thing you're doing is you have the right people in the room together to be able to have a collaborative demo where you can put it in perspective of the problem you're solving, show them the platform and how it can work to address those issues, and make it an engaging process where what you should be experiencing is a lot of dialogue and questions along the way. And depending on what those questions are, you'll have a pretty good sense for how engaging is this to them and how important is it to them, and are we hitting the target that we set out to hit.
If you're listening out there and every one of your demos is the same, then why don't you just hit record the next time you demo it and send that out to your clients going forward. Send them the recording of your demo. I'd like to think that that's not the case for most of us, that we're not using scripts. And we've talked about sales scripts in the past and how those things might be killing the creativity and culture inside your sales organization. But Again, if that demo is the same every time you're delivering it, then why are you wasting your time delivering it over and over again? Why not just record it and send the clip to your customer?
Yeah, most companies now, particularly technology companies, they're going to have a demo loop on their website. And so you can go in there in their product page, and more times than not, you'll find that they already have a pre-recorded loop about the key features of the product. It'll be done very professionally, very nicely, but it tells you if they can't just then say, yeah, let's go ahead and buy this online, they still want to talk to somebody. That tells you that they need to have a discussion. They need to learn because they're not making the connection. The problem with a canned web demo is that it's a pass fail kind of thing. Either the customer is going to connect the dots and understand how they can use this to solve their problem, or they can raise their hand and say, hey, can you walk me through this, or can you help me understand? And they still need to have both the experience that you've had in implementing it with other people and use cases that you have experience with. But generally speaking, unless it's a super simple product, they're still going to want to have some discussion around that.
So, I mean, getting back to the question was around, is this the right thing to measure? And I know we touched on it. We said, no, not really. Or, that there's some danger associated with it. We also talked about kind of where this fits in our process. We've touched on briefly what makes an effective demo. Maybe we close this podcast out by hitting on a couple of really key points, some takeaways for everybody when it comes down to what makes a good demo.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the first thing that comes to mind for me on what makes a good demo is, am I able to integrate the customer's language into my demo? And I use their vocabulary that's common to that organization. Am I able to talk with the customer in a language or using context that aligns with something that's important to them, so that they can really start to visualize how this integrates directly into the things they're doing in an organization? And that works for the vacuum cleaner person who's talking about wrapping a cord around the handle of the vacuum cleaner so that they can take it upstairs and downstairs and all of that kind of stuff, to technically being able to discuss how our APIs might work inside the operating environment of an organization so that product that we're delivering actually integrates into the workflow of their employee base. One of the things that makes me cringe when I sit in on demos that members either of our sales team in the past have delivered, or even current folks, is when we start talking about the organization in the context of lines of business, and the organization refers to each of those entities as divisions. Those details count. Those details matter. And then again, I tend to be a little bit more detail oriented than most.
That's a good point, because you definitely want them to know that you've done your homework, that you've prepared for this. This isn't just one of 16 demos that I'm going to do today and let's see how it goes. And that's something too, that's a nuanced thing, but you can tell when somebody is in demo mode and they've done their product demo a number of times. And I think when you're in a sales environment and you hear people pick up their style, you pick up how they do their demos, but then they incorporate certain phrases, or sometimes I had one person that worked for me that there were like 2 standard jokes that he always said during his demos. And at first and they were appropriate and they were funny and all that stuff, and that was good. But he had said the same thing so many times that you could tell it was just like, insert joke here. It's just so rote, and
it wasn't "don't be a washing machine."
No, it was something about being busier than a one-armed Alabama wallpaper hanger or something like that.
One-armed wallpaper hanger.
Yeah,
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
At first, it had a lot of energy and people got a good ha-ha, but then, when you hear that joke and it's not really delivered with a lot of enthusiasm or excitement, it's just kind of like, not the same effect. So not so much, I'm not talking about jokes. I'm just saying, don't sound like you're a robot giving your 10th demo of the day.
Well, and know your audience, right?
Yeah, definitely know your audience. And then there's a challenge too when you're not in person, when you're doing a web demo, and if you don't have video and you just have this conference room with a bunch of people sitting in it, you don't have the nonverbal reactions. So your listening skills need to be so heightened to be able to hear conversation in a sidebar, or if they're asking questions of each other, and in just having the ability to not call a timeout, but to try and bring people back into the conversation by asking them if they have feedback, but doing it in a way that keeps them engaged versus just being an audience listening to you go through an hour of features and things of your product.
That's why I like being in person for these things, because you can see the nonverbal, you can see the engagement, you can see what's happening. And maybe this is another podcast that we need to add to the list here is how do you gather that information when you're not in the same room? How do you gather more information about the perspective of the customer?
Mike and Mike, this has been incredible information about demos. As we wrap up, give some encouragement to Mike in New Jersey, who is faced with the prospect of giving more and more demos because that's what a sales manager wants. But we're hearing from you today that that's not the best thing to do. But give some encouragement to Mike and the people like him that are judged by the amount of demos that they give.
Mike, hopefully you're a Giants fan and you're excited about Brandon Marshall being part of your team, because as a Jets fan, next year is going to be pretty rough.
Another rebuilding year, huh? I would say that just have that conversation with your sales manager to sit down and say, I get the fact that doing demos oftentimes leads to closed sales. And so that's great. And if it's the only thing you're being measured on, look at the math and look and see, how many. It's just like the vacuum cleaner guy. Use that as an example. How many calls, emails, and how much prospecting activity do you have to do to get a demo? And from the demos, where's the process breaking down? I think if you just look at it from a prospect or a process perspective and really break it down, you can understand that there's more to measure than just the number of demos. And what I would focus on is doing quality demos. And the metric I'd want to move is, okay, when I do get somebody looking at our product and getting product feedback and doing the demo, this is the percentage of them that we actually move forward and end up closing. And I'd make that the next metric to kind of work on. And maybe don't give up on that metric completely, but maybe broaden the scope a little bit and say, what else could we measure? And what else could we see? Because all you're trying to figure out is, what does a forecast look like? What are we heading in the right direction? What are the early indicators that the activity we're investing every day in everything that we do is ultimately going to lead to growth and success? So I would just have an honest conversation. I can tell you, if somebody came to me as a sales rep and said, Mike, just let's have a conversation about what we're measuring and how it's leading to my success. And I would make it about your not questioning how your sales manager is managing his team as a business, but how you're managing your own success as an individual, that you have a common goal. You want to be a successful sales rep, part of a successful sales team, and you want to make sure that the things that you're spending your time on are ultimately going to lead to success.
Well, one of the most common things in this, when you talk about sales as professionals, people like to follow success. They like to learn from others. They see something that's working for someone and they take it on, whether it's a template about account planning or call planning, or it's a structure on how you put together an agenda for a meeting. Share your success with your manager. Have your manager be a part of the conversation. I would expect that manager's a good leader. They're going to identify some distinct differences in the way that you're going about earning your business. And if you're successful, they'll want to apply it inside the organization. And that's how innovation starts to happen inside sales teams. We learn from each other.
Well, thank you, Mike and Mike. And thank you, Mike from New Jersey, for the question. If you have a question you would like Mike and Mike to answer on the show, Mike, tell them where they can get in touch to send a question.
Probably the easiest way, because we both get the emails, is you can just drop an email to hello@catalystsale.com. And that's a good way to reach us. Or you can just send us a direct message through LinkedIn. We're both very easy to find on LinkedIn, or on Twitter @CatalystSale.
Okay, and if you enjoy this show, please consider taking time to subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast, because it helps other people discover the show. Thank you, Mike and Mike, for this great episode, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.